Welcome back for another edition of Forage Focus. My name is Christine Gelley, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about forages for horses with a special new guest. Stay tuned. It is my pleasure to welcome a new special guest to Forage Focus, Miss Haley Zynda. Haley is the new educator in Wayne County, and it's so nice to have you on the show, Haley. I've been meaning to have you on since you started, since we have a mutual interest in forages. So thank you for your time today. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure thing, Christine. Thank you for having me on today. I know I've always enjoyed watching the Forages, Forage Focus videos on the Sheep Team website, of course. So, like you mentioned, I started in Wayne County, and I started in May of this year. Finished right after my master's degree. So I graduated on a Sunday and started work on a Monday. Ooh. So my background is actually in equine science. I went to the University of Kentucky for my undergraduate degree, but I figured that horses weren't going to be my only career stop, so that's when I started a master's in dairy nutrition at Ohio State. So I've worked with extension down at Kentucky before in forages, of course, and horses, so I'm glad to be able to do some of those same things here at Ohio State. As far as programming in Wayne County, we're doing a lot, hitting the ground running. So far, we have had a pumpkin growers workshop, ag lender seminars, and we're going to be ready to start a farm financial management school here in January. So that'll be a lot of fun for both new and old farmers, because you can never have too many tips and tricks on how to deal with farm finances. But I guess one of the more exciting things that I've been working on, especially with you, is being the co-chair for the Forages for Horses Handbook, Canvas course, and webinar series.
All right. So we're going to talk some more about that as we get rolling into the episode today. A little bit of background for those of you who may not be aware. Last year, due to COVID and doing a lot of virtual programming, we took the Pastures for Profit manual, which is a course curriculum for forage-based programming, specifically for pasture managers and how to make their systems more profitable. That has always been offered as an in-person class, and we took the opportunity of being online to switch that into a virtual format. And it went so well that we decided, let's do it for Forages for Horses as well. So the original planning committee for Forages for Horses, the folks who organized it in the beginning, were a lot of overlap with the Pastures for Profit course as well. But the difference with Forages for Horses is it's really focused more for the average horse owner in our area. It is specifically a curriculum for Ohio. And so a lot of the goals of those production systems are different from our typical pasture-based livestock systems. And so I think what people will find with the Forages for Horses virtual class is that it's really going to be helpful for those of you who have companion equine animals and are managing them on a smaller farm, but could even be large scale as well. I think that's going to be a good curriculum for people to get into.
Yeah, it may be appealing to some boarding facilities as well, especially those that may have larger facilities and housing their horses mainly on pasture. The difference between most livestock systems in our equine world is that we're not raising them for meat or milk or fiber, so there's no need to have a super intensive system on them, but we still have to know how to manage our pastures properly, just for the health of the horse and for the health of the land.
Absolutely. Most horse producers that I know aren't really concerned with stocking density. They're more concerned with having their horse in a place that's visible for them to see, and often they're moving the feed to the horses on a regular basis rather than expecting the horses to forage for everything that they need. So often the mindset of management is different for equine producers, and also standards of production can be different as well. So often what we're talking with horse producers about can be drastically different from commercial livestock, like you said, those that are going to wind up in the food chain somewhere. And so throughout the Forages for Horses program, that's the type of mindset you're going to see through the curriculum. Haley, can you tell us some more about the things we've been addressing as we've been updating that curriculum for a newer audience?
of course. So we were definitely using the old handbook as a framework for what we're doing moving forward, taking some things out, putting some new things in. But I would say our main categories have to do with forage selection and pasture establishment, particularly poisonous weeds and things we don't want in our pastures, taking hay analyses and feeding hay because, of course, in the wintertime we're not going to be able to use our pastures. Of course, when horses are on pasture, parasites are an issue, as they would be with some of our small ruminant species. So there will be a small chapter on parasite management in relation to pasture management and outdoor housing. We're getting a little bit into some plant physiology, but not too deep because it's not always the most exciting thing out there.
At least for horse
At least for horse people, yep. And then, of course, we do have a nice nutrition chapter as well, because with feeding horses becomes a feeding requirement scheme as well. So we're going to hit on a lot of different interesting points. I'm personally working on the parasite chapter with my experience in equine parasitology at the University of Kentucky as well. So always glad to be back with the creepy crawlies a little bit. And the horse nutrition with my background in nutrition as well.
Excellent. We have a really well-rounded team working on Forages for Horses.
We do.
And it was a well-rounded team that put together this curriculum in the first place. The Forages for Horses curriculum was really born out of a partnership between OSU Extension, ODA, the Ohio Forage and Grasslands Council, as well as the Natural Resource Conservation Service.
So with our courses, we are also introducing a Canvas course and several webinars to accompany the handbook in itself. The handbook will be a digital version, but we also have the option to order a physical printed version. But essentially our webinars will go through the handbook chapters a little bit at a time, and those will be in January, February, and March. And then our Canvas course will have not only the handbook itself, access to the webinars, but also plenty of other resources that our horse owners and managers may find interest in as well.
Yeah, we're really excited to be able to offer the webinar series. Like you said, it'll be once a month. It'll really be an hour-and-a-half commitment each evening, and so we'll have 2 to 3 speakers each evening. Mm-hmm. So there'll be plenty of time for you to interact with specialists in the field, and then also we'll provide additional opportunities for you to interact with them and ask additional questions. It will be a webinar format, but you will have access to question-answer box and the chat section, mm-hmm. and we will have people moderating that all throughout the webinar so that we can get your questions answered that you have, and then also any feedback that you have on the course will be helpful for us to continue to make it better mm-hmm. in the long run.
So, Christine, we've been talking about Forages for Horses and the handbook and whatnot, and we're talking about the backyard horse owner, but, I mean, how many questions do you really get on horse management and being an extension?
Well, I get quite a few, maybe one per month that's related to equine management on pasture, but mm-hmm. often it's not a question about the horse itself, it's a question about their feed mm-hmm. or their pen in which they're in, and sometimes the discussion is between do you have a pen or do you have a pasture, mm-hmm. And then often that leads into additional discussion, and really when we're trying to give advice to those producers, it's often trying to define the ecosystem in which the horse is living and mm-hmm. all the other things that are happening in that system mm-hmm. that are playing a role in nutrition and health. Mm-hmm. And so most of the questions that I do get are related to forages, but are often related to that the horse owner has read an article that has prompted them to believe that something in their system is dreadfully wrong for their horse and it has to be fixed immediately. Mm-hmm. And often it's not as critical as initially believed, and so we can talk through that and work up some steps to actually work towards better management, mm-hmm. but often it's not quite the crisis that it initially seems in the beginning.
I would agree with that. Just in the few months that I've been here already, I've gotten several calls too, especially on pastures and forages. There's one gentleman that I've been working with on sort of renovating his pastures a little bit, and I would say that probably what folks most call me out for is overgrazing problems, and so that's something that we're going to try to touch on in this handbook itself. But what I think is really interesting is that most people don't recognize Ohio as equine country or horse country.
Oh, definitely. I would agree.
But the really interesting thing about Ohio is that it is, and the horses here aren't just being used for recreation, such as riding and showing and trail riding and fun stuff like that, but we have a very large population of working horses here in the state too, especially where I'm from, and Wayne and the surrounding Holmes counties, the very large Amish population. It's not very often that you're on 250 headed east that you don't pass a buggy or two. So if we can tap into all these different sectors of the equine industry, why not go for it? Most of you, or maybe some of you, are familiar with the Ohio Quarter Horse Congress that happens in October every year. Just incredible numbers of people coming in for that too. So recognizing that Ohio can bring in, 650,000 people in a month's time to look at some pretty show ponies is quite incredible, and we need to be able to cater to that in itself. And then being in Kentucky, of course, we have lots of nice pastures, lots of race horses. Worked at the track myself for a little bit. But in Ohio, we also have harness racing. The Little Brown Jug race in Delaware County is probably one of the more famous races, and even 66 of our 88 counties have harness racing at each of their county fairs.
Wow.
So it is really an incredible industry to be a part of, and it touches all corners of the state. So I'm glad to be a part of this project to help so many folks out.
And we're excited to have you on board because Forages for Horses is one of those things that we've all wanted to get updated for a newer audience for a long time. And so we're happy to have some people who are excited about the topic. They're taking the time to work on it more in depth. Mm-hmm. And you talked about, horses that have a job to do.
Yes.
Those nutritional requirements for a working horse are going to be quite a bit different from one that's really just living out their days on some happy grass. And so I'm interested to see what else is going to be in that nutrition section.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that we're going to try to hit in our webinar series in January is feeding the different classes of horse. When you look through the nutrient requirements of different animals in those reference books, they all have lactating and gestating animals, growing animals, and mature animals. But in the horse and the equine book, we actually have a working horse and level of activity section in there to figure out what their requirements are, because horses that are in heavy work 5 or 6 days a week, whether for performance or plowing fields, they definitely have and need a higher level of nutritional use.
Yeah, and then aside from the workload that they're put under, we also have such a wide range of sizes and ages of equids within Ohio that we need to cater to, and that can include, donkeys, mules, ponies, all the way up to, Percherons, Clydesdales, and so we can have a wide variety of nutritional needs, especially like in a boarding situation.
Oh, yes.
And each one is going to have their own catered diet that they need on a regular basis. So it can get confusing for folks who are managing multiple equids at the same time. So we're excited to get into that. We recognize there's a lot of diversity in the equine industry in Ohio. And we'd also encourage, if you're from a different state and you're watching this right now, we're welcome to attend our program as well. It might be a little more difficult for you to attend our pasture walks that we have slated for the summertime, but we'd welcome you to attend those too. When people register for the webinar series, they're actually going to get a voucher to come to a pasture walk.
Yep.
And our hope is to have 9 different pasture walks throughout the state.
Which is a lot of pasture walking, but I mean, like I said, every corner of the state we need to have something available for all walks.
Yeah, so our hope is that wherever you are within Ohio, that we will have a pasture walk within an hour's drive of where you live so that you can join us in the pasture with some one-on-one conversation with the instructors you're seeing during the course. We'll have a lot of additional personnel there, local extension educators, as well as our specialists. And then one of the best things about a course like this is interacting with your peers and meeting other people from the class as well. We'll probably have some social hour activities that are virtual, but then we'll look forward to having those in-person pasture walk experiences as well. And we'll provide a variety of materials during the pasture walks that you may not have seen during the webinar series. And another thing, the webinar series is actually going to be open for a whole year. So you can return to the course and access the materials that you need anytime through the rest of the year, which would be all of 2022. So if something didn't quite stick from the first webinar, have no fear, you can go back, you'll be able to rewatch the recording, you can reread whatever you want. And so we're excited that we have that platform to house our virtual stuff, and we're excited too about the in-person opportunities.
Exactly. You never know what you might see at a pasture walk. It could be what to do, could be what not to do, but regardless, there's always something to learn at an in-person event like that.
So we're hoping to have our complete schedule of pasture walks ready to release in March by the third webinar of the series. And we invite anybody that has an interest to come out and join us for those events. They're going to be really something to see, I think.
I think so too. So something else that comes up a lot when I talk about pastures is just how muddy they get. We have a mud chapter, don't we?
Yeah.
Not to fear, we definitely have a mud and manure management chapter. I'll never forget a class that I had in undergrad. We were talking about equine management, talking about some pasture management, and one of our ag engineers came in to talk about dry lots and sacrifice lots. And he told us that in the square inches, or the square inch of a horse's hoof versus the tracks on a bulldozer, the horse emits more pounds per square inch under that hoof than a Caterpillar type bulldozer would. And I think that's a really interesting perspective when we're talking about taking care of the land, pastures, and grass establishment, just to ensure that we have that root mass there to continue to have wonderful growth throughout the year and to survive the winter and head into the spring as well.
Those are excellent points, Haley, because as we know, all life depends on soil, and every action that we're taking is affecting our soil texture and our soil quality. And so when we have a buildup of mud on our pastures, we increase our chances of having compaction, and then with our various stocking densities or the ways we lay out our paddocks with where water's located, where food is located, we can drastically influence the soil texture and health over time, not just with compaction, but also with the distribution of nutrients throughout the pasture. So we're going to talk more about that in the course as well, and we'll talk a lot about manure composting too. I'd say many horse producers that I interact with don't have a lot of space to dispose of their manure.
Absolutely. And that is a difficult topic that actually some of our friends at the Ohio Department of Ag are going to be helping us with. Horses are considered livestock under their rules and regulations, and so just knowing what to do with that manure and when will help you from and prevent you from getting a call from them or a complaint against you with some of their neighbors. But being good stewards of the land to prevent insect infestation and odors and smells, you got to know what to do with that manure.
Yeah, and then we'll also talk some too about the regulations for manure after it's been composted, if you can move it, if you can sell it. If you're in a business where you want to be able to use those nutrients for another purpose, that's excellent. We also want to make sure that you'll be able to do so legally. So we'll provide everything from the science on how manure breaks down to the legality of manure systems and also sales too. And another thing I'm looking forward to in this course is the economics chapter. When we tend to talk about economics in horse production, it's less about the economics of the horse and more about the economics of housing and feed costs. So
the cheapest part of buying the horse is buying the horse.
Especially if we're going to have it for 30 years.
Yes. The horse will follow you, and they'll be a lovely friend, but for a very long time, so you got to be prepared.
Yeah, so having a budget and trying to stick to it is important, both for whatever housing structures you need to provide or want to provide, as well as your sources of feed, and having a consistent source of feed year to year, making sure it's high quality, and that you're getting really good customer service as well. There's a lot of people who cater to the horse producers of Ohio, and many of them do an excellent job, and they want to have a pleasant experience with you, so they're happy to work with you on the things that you need. But the earlier you can make requests of them, the better, because every year has challenges with production, and so if you need to secure a hefty amount of hay or even grain,
Yeah.
It's good to have a plan ahead of time and try to buy in bulk if possible, and if you have the storage space for it.
And storage is everything. You want to make sure that, especially if you're feeding some sort of concentrate, ration balancer, or a pelleted complete feed for that matter, you don't want rodents to get in there, and you don't want to have any of that grain to spoil. So making sure that you have appropriate storage methods is essential to keep the feed good for your horse and to keep a little more money in your pocket.
And speaking of things that could potentially be contaminants and lead to health issues, there's a couple other health issues that we'll touch on in the course. We're not veterinarians here, but there are some common problems that we get questions about, like laminitis or colic, and we'll talk about some of the factors that play into those conditions and what we can do as pasture managers to try to reduce those occurrences, so we'll have that information available as well.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have a veterinarian already, yes, please get one. If you're going to be keeping livestock and you intend to keep them alive, you should probably have a relationship with the local veterinarian.
Absolutely. Far too many times I have seen horses going to colic late in the evening, and the first call is always to the vet, and they're out there in a heartbeat to help you and your horse.
I'd say the most unfortunate calls that I've gotten in extension so far were related to a horse that had an issue and it wasn't addressed in a timely enough manner to be able to save it. And in my experience, that's often related to poisonous weeds.
Yes, poisonous weeds, there are plenty of them out there that can affect horses. So we'll make sure to have lots of pictures and descriptions available for those, just so you can keep an eye out in your own pasture. And if you have a question on what the weeds might be, go ahead and give us a call or give your local agents a call, educators, and we'll come out and make an identification for you as well.
Absolutely. Some of the things that I tell folks if they are concerned about poisonous weeds, because if you go down the rabbit hole of poisonous weeds, you may have a lot of trouble getting back out, and you may be afraid of everything that's growing in the pasture, because too much of anything can be a bad thing.
Absolutely.
But when we're talking about things that are high on the target list, things like eastern black nightshade or poison hemlock or buttercup, often these weeds are taking hold in a horse pasture because something's off with the grazing management.
Yes.
And we just want to make sure that our animals don't get to the point that they're too hungry or too bored to start exploring those.
Exactly, and that's something I often see, especially with buttercup. If you're overgrazing pastures, weeds are opportunists in themselves. So poor soil fertility, bare and open soil, wet soil, dry soil, they'll take any chance they can get. So when you graze it too low, a lot of times I see buttercups in equine and horse pastures, which is poisonous to horses, ironically enough. But like you said, typically they don't bother it until there's nothing else in the pasture to eat. But if the buttercups only come up when it's overgrazed, chances are the good tasty stuff to eat is dwindling in itself too.
Yeah, and I don't know about in your experience, but in my experience, I've never really seen like a horse that wears a Fitbit and actually checks what time to eat, or counts calories, or make sure they have all the food groups on their plate. Even if they've been well fed, they could occasionally nibble on something that's not good for them. So scouting for things that might be poisonous is important. If you ever have any questions, please reach out to your local educator. We are here to help, and we want to help you to our best ability. So if you do have a question about some type of a weed or a plant that you're not familiar with, the best thing to do is probably call us first, and then we'll tell you the best way to bring the weed in for identification. We may be able to get it from a picture or a video, or we may require seeing the whole plant, but some of these plants can be poisonous to you as well as the manager. So we want to give you the right advice on how to handle the material before you bring it into the office. So hopefully you don't have any experience with poisonous weeds, and you'd just be excited to learn some new information about them. But often, we have like exercise lots or round pen or something that may have not been used on a frequent basis and then has overgrowth in it. Horses are not sheep or goats, and often we use animals like sheep and goats to tame areas like that.
And horses are not a good candidate for that, just because of they have very sensitive tummies. After thousands of years of evolution, you'd think that they'd have the opportunity to puke up or whatever makes them sick, but that's not the case. So a lot of times that's when we'll see some colic and health issues.
Yeah, so I really suggest using the weed whacker for those types of situations if possible, rather than trying to get that material consumed. So we're excited to interact with everyone during the course.
Absolutely.
Share some reputable information with folks.
Reputable information, probably lots of fun anecdotal information when things do and don't work in relation to what we're trying to teach. But it's never a dull moment, for sure.
And an extension in all things in life, I like to stick to the motto of never say never and never say always, because someone will always prove you wrong. So we're excited to hear the stories from our producers, as well as our specialists and our educators in the class. And we hope that you will come and join us for the Forages for Horses virtual class, as well as some of our pasture walks coming up this summer.
Absolutely. We can't wait to see you guys, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say and think about what we were putting out there for you.
And Haley, if folks in the Wayne County area would like to interact with you, get to know you, what's the best way to reach you?
So you can always call our office, 330-264-8722, or you can always shoot me an email at zynda.7@osu.edu, zynda.7@osu.edu.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to not just our Forages for Horses class, but all of the other content you're going to be bringing to Wayne County and the rest of the state through your extension career.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. I'm so glad to be here and glad to work with you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
On the next episode of Forage Focus.